I had the kind of feeling like there was no bottom in my stomach, no floor beneath my feet, and a slight breeze could have sent me plummeting, like Wile E. Coyote already 10 steps past the cliff. It's a long way from where I stand now, 10 years later in my kitchen, making dinner for Leslie, who is now my wife, and our 1-year-old son, Julian. Julian is strapped to my chest in one of those ergo carriers. I want to show him how to make pizza dough, the most important ingredient in pizza, and a specialty of mine. It makes me think back to that first time I met her father, Scott, and Tiziana, Scott's wife, and how she showed me how to make dough. In a way, this recipe has bound me to her family and has become a new tradition for my own. "You help me make a focaccia," Tiziana said that night. She's in her mid-30s and has a thick, almost comical Italian accent, the kind that adds an A to every word. The kitchen was a bit cramped, exposed brick walls, high stools under a small counter space, and we were drinking wine to loosen up, but it hadn't started to work yet. "Focaccia, that's flatbread, right?" I asked. "I don't know how to make it." Tiziana pulled me to the counter and set me working anyway. "We need to make a dough. It's easy." But what does this have to do with the pizza I'm making now? As I looked into the history of focaccia, which is thousands of years old, I read that it was considered to be an early prototype of pizza.
I think I start more than pizza. I start making focaccia. That is something that I started making in Italy already. It was something that my mom would do, and then I learned to make it from her. And then, of course, once I came here, I started to make my own pizza because it's the same. I could not find a place that would make pizza as I wanted. So I think the first time I started making focaccia, and then I said, well, if I can make focaccia, I can make pizza.
Having South origins but living in the North, it was hard for Tiziana to find the focaccia she wanted, even in Italy. Many areas of Italy have their own customs and variations of focaccia.
So in the North, they might do focaccia with milk and olives. In the South, instead, is more like olive oil, and they make it rise several times, so it's very fluffy, and there is oregano and tomatoes on it, because those are the ingredients that you find more in the South.
It's not hard to imagine this dough becoming the base for her pizzas.
So, but the traditional focaccia pugliese, that one where they put the cherry tomatoes with oregano and olive oil and sometimes olives, because they grow olive trees down there, and the tomatoes too.
That night, Tiziana had me measure out flour, not in cups, but in grams, using a scale. 250 grams, to be precise. "Dump it on the counter," she said. She formed the flour into a mini Vesuvius, and in the crater poured water and yeast that she had proofed. These tiny grains, like sand, are organisms that eat sugar and gluten and produce gas. That's why dough rises. While preparing the food, we talked. All of us, Scott, Leslie, Tiziana, and myself. The more we talked, the more comfortable I felt. After tasting the focaccia, Scott invited me over to help cook any time. Tiziana tells me later about when she learned to cook.
Well, it was a long process. It took all my life. So I basically started to learn about cooking at my first meal. And it was something that we would do together with my parents. You help your parents. So they would send you first to get the basil from the garden or the parsley, go get the rosemary. So you learn all the herbs like that.
That's how I want to teach my son, Julian. I strap him to my chest in his ergo baby carrier, and I walk him through the process. I've replaced Tiziana's volcano with a Cuisinart, but the results are pretty much the same. Julian's only task is to watch, which he does, craning his head over the carrier to see. Once the dough has risen, about 45 minutes, we take it from the bowl. I spread oil on a baking pan, round out the dough, and add the toppings. Pesto, fresh mozzarella, cherry tomatoes. Leslie comes in the kitchen and says, "Is it done yet? I'm starving." I motion her over, and the three of us peek into the oven. The cheese is bubbling and the crust is turning golden. "Time to set the table," I announce. We work together. She pours some wine. I divide our slices, and we sit down to eat as a family. It's a way to spend time together, Tiziana told me about her cooking with her family. I couldn't agree more.